Well, Evan, thank you so much for helping my project. I really appreciate it.
For sure. Yeah, happy to be a part of it. It definitely sounds interesting. If we have time, I'd love to hear just a little bit more about, what inspired it.
Oh, sure. I'd be more than happy to talk about that. Maybe it'd be good to start off with a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So, my name's Evan Sunderman. I work, at Anaplan with you, and I we actually met, I guess, a few months back, talking about some work you were doing, and that was relevant to my job as a customer success business partner. And one fun fact about me is I actually got married last year on the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. So
Uh,
I did not plan that, but that's how it worked out. And my uncle, who was in the Air Force, and my wife's grandfather, who was like a rocket scientist with Rocketdyne. They were both very quick to point out that we were getting married on the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, which is a pretty fun fact. So relevant to this discussion, I figured.
yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, congratulations. And second of all, does this strike you that it was 50 years ago that we landed on the moon and looking at what we've done since then?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it, it's interesting in some ways to look back and after my wedding, I actually picked up a book called Rocketman, that was written by, I think, a guy named Robert Kurtzen or something like that, and it detailed kind of the moon landing mission and just learning how advanced the technology used to get to the moon back then was, and how many thousands of components went into um, the rockets and the landing craft. And basically it was like riding a nuclear bomb to the moon, and that there were so many components that even if 99.9% of them were effective, you'd still have like thousands of defective components. And just like how technologically savvy the space program had to be to get people to the moon. I think it surprises me that we haven't done more, I suppose, and that there hasn't been like more beyond the moon and back to the moon exploration. So it does seem like things have definitely slowed. And when I saw your message, preparing for the return to the moon, I thought it was really interesting because I've taken a little bit of an interest in the historical moon landing missions and space exploration, and it's definitely interesting to see where we're going. And it feels like it's led more now almost by private enterprises. Like earlier this year, my wife and I watched the SpaceX rocket launch, going up to the International Space Station, with two astronauts in it, which was pretty cool to see that at least that there's a renewed interest in going back to the moon and renewed interest in space travel and exploration.
Yeah, and kind of one interesting historical event that's happening today is the last currently contracted spot with the Russians to launch one of our own astronauts, because
Really?
now we have the capability of launching our own astronauts on SpaceX rocket. We no longer have to use the Russians to take us there.
Yeah, that is interesting. It's cool to see, the U.S. getting back involved. Even if it's private enterprise, it's really fascinating. And I mean, even what like SpaceX and other groups effective to, or like the retrievable rockets that can like land back down is pretty interesting to. And I'm certainly not an expert, but it definitely makes sense that having retrievable and reusable parts is going to make more space travel and exploration a lot more feasible from a cost perspective.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy to think that currently the way rockets are done, you spend like a year or two building them, and you spend all these tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, and then you only use them for like 2 minutes, and then they're
Yeah,
they're gone.
yeah, it's definitely not a real scalable, sustainable way to do it, I imagine. But yeah, it's pretty cool seeing it like come back and land down, out in the middle of the ocean there. I think that's a pretty cool thing. So crazy that it takes private enterprise to do that. I guess I don't know all the history of like why the space program slowed down a little bit. why the technology didn't keep advancing. I'd be curious if you know more about that. If it just was like lack of appetite from a political perspective, or if it was just the technology wasn't keeping pace with the need.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting if you look at the way that space has been done. It's been done by big government contractors who work on essentially non-competitive projects for the government. So, you got to think computing back then were these huge multi-room devices that only through like intense innovation and competition became the handheld devices that we have today.
Yeah.
And you didn't quite see that same thing materialize with space, but I think we're starting to see the beginnings of it now between like SpaceX and Blue Origin, which is Jeff Bezos's company, and then like dozens of other companies, big, medium, and small, that are really making an investment in space. But when did you find out that we were going to the moon in 2024?
I think I honestly found out from your email that you put out, wanting to talk about it. I don't think I was aware of that. I mean, I was definitely aware of some of the more recent like SpaceX, missions, but I wasn't familiar that we were planning to go back in 2024. So I found out from you. You get to break that news for me.
I would like to say that you're special like that, but out of like most of the people that I talked to, I would say 80% of them did not know that we were going to the moon in 2024. That
Yeah, I would say even since I heard from you, I would say I haven't seen a lot of news about that or anything. So I'm not surprised that there's other people like me that weren't in the know.
But what do you think about it? Good thing, bad thing, wrong time, good time?
I mean, I definitely think it's a good thing. I don't know about the timing. I mean, I don't necessarily view there as like good or bad timing, I suppose, but I'm sure they need time maybe to, plan the mission and make sure they have the right technology. But I think it's a good thing. I mean, so much, so much technology, was created out of like the initial like space and moon missions, whether it's like materials or like rocket technology. There's been so many things gleaned and learned from those missions. And I think like more pushing of the boundaries with travel and exploration can only, be a good thing long term in terms of what we can learn about, what's around us, but also just it's like forced innovation. If you're going to do something new, you've got to come up with more powerful, engines, or more efficient, engines. You've got to come up with materials that can withstand, the extreme temperatures, or ways to help the astronauts like be comfortable and survive like during their mission. And I think um, I read an article in the Wall Street Journal recently talking about like the world that war has made and all of the innovations that have come out of like conflict and things. And space obviously isn't like a conflict, but it's another example where, um, like necessity breeds innovation. And I think it's definitely a good thing to continue to try and um, push forward. And we're not in quite the same situation with like the space race with the Soviets that we were, but I definitely think it's good for the United States to be in the lead on technology, of any kind, whether that's computing technology or space technology. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, as you were talking about the competing and war and stuff like that. I was remembering back to like English class of all things about some basic archetypes of stories. You have like person versus person and person versus group and group versus
Yeah.
group, and you have like person versus nature and group versus
Yeah.
nature. It's just like, I mean, the more that I think we could get it in terms of humanity versus the universe,
Yeah.
the better it is for all of us instead of humanity versus each other.
Yeah, that's probably a good way of looking at it. My view might have been a bit more cynical, but I guess yeah, you're right. I mean, I guess that's part of it is like even out of some of these like competitions or conflicts, like good things can still arise, whether that's from like medical technology or anything. But I totally agree. I mean, I think the more we can learn about the universe and, our environment and continually, innovate things to help us here on Earth, it would be a good thing.
And how does space like fit into your future of like humanity? Do you see it as, a way for us to sort of just more like the Olympics, and we're like trying to get like the first person on the moon, the first person on Mars, the first person to be in space for 2,000 days? Are we like trying to get like these first, or do you really see like humanity branching out into the solar system and you know, going from Earth to the moon may not be like an everyday trip, like a commute in the office, but might be sort of like on the level of difficulty of going to Antarctica or to Everest. I mean, like, where is it in terms of your view?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't view it as like an Olympics type thing, like you said. I think that type of endeavor is maybe not quite as, it's harder to maybe justify as like a taxpayer to say, hey, we're going to use a lot of money to, or private enterprises probably don't have the incentive, like they want to do things for, some sort of profit or provide some sort of experience. I think one thing I read about in the Apollo missions was just like the perspective change that the astronauts had on the Earth, being able to look back at the entire Earth. And like everything you've ever known is like down there on this little blue dot, blue marble, and just kind of the perspective change that gives you about like Earth and about life. And I think um, I would be interested in going to space to have that experience, like as just like almost like space tourism, I suppose. I think it'd be interesting, like if people had the ability to go to space and just have this kind of perspective altering experience, even, or travel to the moon and just like see how much is out there, And I know for a lot of people, no matter what their faith was, they said it was like a very religious experience, like being able to like look back at the Earth. And I think I would be interested in that. I imagine there are a lot of people that would be as well. Um, Aside from that, I guess it would be interesting, who knows what types of things we can learn or discover about like, if other planets can sustain life, or, like what types of um, environments or materials exist on other planets. I certainly don't know that much about that, but if there are things that could, aid life on Earth or sustain life on other planets, it would certainly be, interesting. It seems far-fetched in my lifetime, but you never know. I think back about like my grandfather was born in the early 1920s, and he was in World War II. He grew up on a farm in Nebraska, in like a German-speaking immigrant family, and he used to like ride a horse to go to school. And to think like when he was a kid, riding his horse to school, to think that someone would land on the moon, you know, before he was, retired, it probably would have seemed impossible. So I certainly don't doubt that it's possible that people will be traveling to the moon, or that there could be some sort of moon colony. It definitely seems possible, but I don't know if I'd be someone who'd be signing up to go uh, live somewhere else, or like go to the moon even, but I would definitely be interested in like orbiting the Earth and seeing it.
And would you be willing to do that like on a SpaceX rocket today, or do you like need to see it kind of its safety record proven out a little bit more?
Yeah, I'd probably want to see the safety record proved out a little bit more. I don't know. I mean, if I got like a free chance to go up, and orbit the Earth, like I would definitely consider it. But probably have to run that one by my wife, see if she was okay with that as well. But it'd be cool.
There is a reality TV show that's in the works that plans to be a global competition to select an individual to send to the International Space Station for 10 days.
That
That
would be
sounds like
interesting.
something you'd be interested in.
I don't know about that. I don't know if I'd want everyone seeing my experience, but that I might be interested in watching that. It'd be interesting to see how a normal person reacts to kind of that amount of stress. One thing that was really interesting in the Rocketman book that I read was just the backgrounds of all the different astronauts, and a lot of them were test pilots, and so they were people who had a lot of military flying experience, and they were used to flying things that were new and unproven, and so they had a lot of courage to be like, there's a chance that, something in this, aircraft doesn't work or could malfunction. And so they had that kind of background. And so it made it easier to swallow, saying like, I'm going to get on an unproven rocket that, like I said, is basically powered by like, a nuclear bomb underneath us. And we're going to try and do something that no one's ever done before. And like, so I think like you need a unique individual like testing things out for the first time. And I don't know if I'm that person, but if I didn't have a lot of responsibility, I might trust someone who did have the right skill set to take me up there.
I think that's a very good point. We've sent people to space who are very stoic, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're the type of people, as the ship is falling apart, they're going, Houston, I think the ship is falling apart. They're not very the
Yeah.
emotional type people, right?
Yeah.
So, I just wonder if that's kind of dampened their ability to connect with like people on an emotional level and create like the excitement and enthusiasm, just because they kind of have to control it so much themselves.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because reading about how these like guys, it was all men on the Apollo missions, but how their like spouses handled the knowledge of them being up there, and like it'd almost be easier if you had a lot of responsibility being on the space shuttle because it'd kind of keep you preoccupied. But if you were just stressing about someone up there, it'd be very difficult. And one interesting like it's not just the fear of like there could be something catastrophic that happens that leads to like a quick death or something, but they said a big concern was if they got the navigation wrong, and even just like your angle is slightly off as you try and like get into the orbit of the moon, you could either crash into the moon, like you'd get too like close to it and get sucked into its gravitational pull, or if you just missed it a little bit, you'd be aiming away from the moon with no chance to get back. And so you would essentially just be drifting through space, indefinitely. And I think the reality of like of that is like almost hard to swallow. Like so for those guys to like accept that risk, and the same thing coming back. So when they like launched out of the moon's orbit to return back to Earth, if you missed again, you could totally miss the Earth and just float through space in perpetuity. And that's a pretty difficult idea to get your head around. And so these guys were definitely, like you said, I think pretty stoic and pretty brave. And um, obviously if like someone like me goes up to space, we're not going to have that expertise. We're going to be relying on instruments and technology to get us there, which but the risks, I suppose, are still there. So it's something that maybe people don't think about, kind of like how just getting on a plane, you don't think about all the things that go into all the forces of physics and things. So I think that would be interesting.
Or even the precise coordination between the planes, air traffic control towers, and other things. I mean, I think that's the biggest concern, is like using cell phones during landing and takeoff, or it's not so much. I mean, just that precise coordination whenever you get in a plane is just, one pilot hears one instruction wrong and suddenly they're in the wrong place.
Yeah, definitely. And space isn't that crowded right now, but that could change in the future. And one thing I've read about is there's a lot of debris in space, and that the US and other countries work together to track like debris that exists like in the Earth's orbit. And and they said that there is a concern that if certain nations like destroy satellites, like I think some nations have like destroyed satellites for like security reasons, it creates a lot more debris, and it just kind of like grows exponentially as you have things that break up or get destroyed. And that's a component of it that I'd never thought, is like we rely on Earth very heavily on like GPS, and that's powered by satellites. And if you just make the Earth's orbit so full of debris that it gets hard to have satellites up there, or to have like aircraft, like spacecraft, go through it, it could be, how do you fix that? Like that creates a whole new problem. And it's interesting to think of all the little unknowns that you don't think about. You don't think about like there being debris flying through space when you try and launch. You don't think about, there's a lot of unknowns.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But you mentioned at the beginning you were wanting to know a little bit about my motivations for this project. Um, the irony is I started this project in December of last year because I was working from home, and I wanted a project that would force me to get out and interact with a person in person every single day. So
Yeah.
like between December and March, I interviewed people at Starbucks, at the streets, on the streets, at the mall, at the airports, and just random people that I didn't know. Go up to them and say, "Hey, we're going back to the moon. Care to talk about it?" Uh, and then whenever the whole COVID lockdown thing happened, I've had to do it online. So my number one foundation or reason is like a personal development type project.
Very cool.
And then the second thing is I just wanted to get people's thoughts. I've learned so much from this. One of the most surprising things I learned from people was somebody said, we shouldn't go to the moon because we've messed up the earth already. We shouldn't be messing up the moon. And that was just like a complete perspective that caught me off guard
Yeah.
that I didn't really consider. So it's kind of neat.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm sure people have tons of different perspectives and opinions, so I'm sure you are learning a lot. And yeah, hopefully it sounds like you know some things maybe more than others. So hopefully you're getting to educate people a little bit as well.
I do have something that you might be interested in. Have you ever heard of the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program?
No, I can't say that I have.
Okay, so NASA has all these scientific instruments and rovers they want to put on the moon. And used to, they would build the rocket, build the lander, get their equipment up there. But a couple of years ago, they started this program to actually have some private companies compete to do it. So they have 14 companies that every year they give 2 different contracts to. And next year, the first 2 companies will be landing on the moon: Intuitive Machines, based in Houston, and Astrobotic, which is based in Pittsburgh. And the cool thing is NASA says, we'll pay you to deliver a payload, but you're responsible for all the details. And if you have other people you want to carry too, as long as it doesn't affect our thing, you do whatever you want to with it. So Astrobotics is doing this thing with DHL where you can send like uh, something to the moon. So I paid like the smallest one is like for the size of a micro SD card. It's like $450. So I went ahead and paid for that, and I'm planning to put these videos on that card, and it'll land on the moon next summer. So,
Very
um,
cool.
a couple hundred years ago from now, or dozens of years from now, somebody will find the micro SD card with this video of you talking about the future of humanity.
That's really interesting. That's a really cool project. Yeah, I'm definitely interested to in 2024 maybe you can have a montage of all the videos or a few clips from it, and it'd be fun to revisit before the mission to take it up there.
Yeah, definitely. But assuming you're talking to somebody in the future that found this micro SD card, uh, don't know if it's like 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, what would you want to tell that person?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I would just encourage people like to turn to Jesus. Like I'm a Christian, and my faith is the cornerstone of my life, and so I would say pick up a Bible and read the Bible, and that's the best advice I could give someone.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. It does bring up another question. I mean, one facet about Christian teaching is about the end of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, how that affects your view in terms of like space exploration. I mean, I've kind of seen it as 2 ways. One is the world's going to end. What's the point of trying to extend life beyond the earth? And the second way is like that parable that Jesus likes that told about the guy, the rich person going on a trip, and he gives his servants like, 50
Mm-hmm.
talents of gold and 20 talents of gold and 10 talents of gold, and he comes back and the one with 50 like doubled it, and the one that had 20 doubled it, and the one that had 10 buried it because he's so afraid of losing it. I almost interpret that story as, from a civilization, we really should go as far as we can. But it's just kind of like, what's your take?
Yeah, I would definitely say, I lean towards the latter. I think, we should take care of, our environment. And, I do think it's been created for us by the Lord, and that he wants us to steward it well and take care of it. So I think it is our responsibility to, I don't think we need to feel guilty about certain ways that we impact our environment, because I do believe that we've been given dominion over, the earth and over creation. But I think part of having dominion is stewarding it well, and taking care of it, and not destroying it, but rather using it and living in harmony with our surroundings and our environment. So, we're just on the very, very cutting edge in terms of, if you think of all of human history, of space being a part of, our domain. But I do think, we need to take care of it. And if there's things we can learn from going to space, or things we can discover in space that help all of humankind, whether it's on the earth or in space, I think it's a good thing.
Well, thank you so much, Evan. I guess before we close up, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
No, I would just tell you I'm using your MAT tool on a pretty regular basis. So thanks for all the good work you do for Anaplan, and I really enjoyed this conversation. It's been really fun, and thanks for sharing this project with me. And looking forward to hear how it develops over the next few years.
Well, thank you so much, Evan, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Nathan. You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.